in a one-horse open sleigh.
Dawn, come see what Santa brought you.
Oh, Christ, I'm coming.
A few years ago when I did the first version of this video, I called it The Only 10 Christmas Movies That I Don't Hate. And that was meant to be a joke because there are so many terrible Christmas movies that I think the genre as a whole is obnoxious, but there are still certain ones that I really love. So almost as soon as I posted the video, I realized I left off some movies that really should have been on there, including one that really should have been at least in second place. And so the next year I made an updated version with 4 more movies. And then almost as soon as I posted the updated version, I thought of some more titles that really should have been on the list, and I thought maybe this would become a video that I would keep updating or something. And so now I've made this new version with another 4 titles added. Since the video keeps getting longer and longer and has almost 20 movies now, and since I keep thinking of new ones to add, the whole joke of me hating almost every Christmas movie doesn't really make much sense anymore, since there are obviously so many Christmas movies that I like. So I guess that now this is just a video about a list of best Christmas movies more than a video about Christmas movies being bad. The thing that got the biggest reaction in the first version of the video was that I said I don't like It's a Wonderful Life, and I still don't like it.
Oh, Jesus. Enough already.
Part of the point of the video was that there are a lot of Christmas movies that people seem to love that I find mostly cloying or very overplayed at least, and kind of obnoxious. And that's still true. It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, A Christmas Story, Meet Me in St. Louis. I'm not a fan of any of those movies.
Right here in St. Louis.
But then there's the other thing, which is all the trash, like the millions of Hallmark Christmas movies that are cranked out, or the really bad pandering kind of family audience Christmas movies like Polar Express or the Ron Howard version of The Grinch. I thought movies like that were pretty much universally considered terrible, but as soon as I mention any one of those, though, somebody will tell me that they love it. So I think that the way a lot of people feel about these movies comes down to whether people saw them at the right age and happen to have nostalgia for them. I mean, of course, there are more movies on my list from the 90s when I was a kid and so on, but I've still made an effort to make this a list of movies that I think are actually interesting movies, as opposed to just because of the memories that I have of them when I first saw them.
Well, let's hear the opening chord.
I decided to put the Holdovers at the end of the list as an honorable mention for now, since it's new and I only just saw it, so I don't know how long it will hold up. But as long as I was making this video and I happened to just see a new Christmas movie that I liked, I felt like it should be on here. But as for the issue of nostalgia affecting our memories of these movies, that obviously isn't a factor in this case, since I can't have nostalgia for this movie in particular. But I think that part of the reason that I like this movie is because it seems to tap into a sense of nostalgic Christmas feelings in general. It's important that the movie is set in the past because even if you weren't the same age as the characters were at that time, it still gives the movie a kind of warm feeling of looking back on an earlier time and Christmas memories and all of that. I've heard complaints that the movie is predictable, which I think is kind of beside the point. You know, within the first few minutes, certain things are going to happen in this movie as soon as you understand what kind of movie it is. The characters mostly don't like each other at first. They're stranded together alone at Christmas when they don't want to be. So, you know, there will be a series of episodes where there are revelations about the characters and they get to know each other better, and that by the end of it, they'll come to understand each other more and feel differently towards each other, right? That's the kind of movie that it is. Their hearts will grow like the Grinch. That's just built into the type of movie that you're watching. You can tell that that's what's going to happen from the first trailer. I've also heard people say that the movie is meandering, which I think is also a criticism that doesn't really make sense if you understand what type of movie it is. It's not plot driven. The story is just the characters learning about each other. So whether or not it works comes down to whether you think the characters are interesting and you enjoy watching them. I did. I liked it. I thought it was very sweet, but not overly cloying or sentimental. I guess I'll see how it ages when I watch it again over the years, but for now I really enjoyed it, so I'm adding this on to the end of the list.
Now
Now, will you tell us the story of the most horrible Christmas ever?
When I decided to include TV specials on this list as movies, I really should have included the Invader Zim Christmas episode, since it's really one of the best. It's actually the first Invader Zim episode I saw, in spite of it being the last episode of the series. I was at a small theater that was having a Christmas event, and they showed this episode as a short before Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. And I liked this one episode enough that I went and got the Invader Zim DVDs and watched the rest of the series. You could make the case here that, like in a lot of the classic Christmas movies, there's an anti-commercialism message with the people worshiping Santa like a god and begging for presents. Zim is here to conquer the earth and enslave humans, but most of the humans in the show in this episode are so obnoxious and repulsive it's hard not to sometimes agree that maybe they deserve it. Stinking humans! Maybe the idea that humans are horrible and deserve to be taken out by an alien race isn't exactly on message for a Christmas movie, but this show was always about avoiding anything saccharine and subverting what you'd expect from most cartoons. So if you've seen too many of the bad, sentimental Christmas movies that this video was originally complaining about, then seeing this one kind of blow those expectations up is refreshing.
And what do you want, little boy or girl?
I want me a pair of flies! I want me 2 balls of glue to be my friends! And I want to go dancing naked!
The original Grinch cartoon is maybe much more of a classic Christmas movie with a heartwarming lesson, and its point is obviously that Christmas shouldn't be about materialism and presents in a much more clear-cut way than in the Invader Zim episode. But it's also not overly saccharine and obnoxious because it also follows the story of somebody who initially doesn't like Christmas, like Zim or like Ebenezer Scrooge, and then you get to watch them evolve. I don't know why I didn't include this one in the earlier versions of this video, except that I think maybe I hated the Ron Howard version so much that it just turned me off of the entire Grinch thing. But I loved the original cartoon growing up. As a kid, I always loved Chuck Jones, and I could always tell when a Looney Tunes cartoon was one that he had worked on. His style and sense of humor and the facial expressions he gave the characters were just instantly distinctive. I also loved Dr. Seuss as a kid, which is probably why it bothered me so much to see his work and his visual style mutilated by something like the Ron Howard movie. So in this movie, you have Dr. Seuss, you have Chuck Jones, and then you even have the great Boris Karloff doing the voiceover and singing. It's a perfect cartoon. How can you improve on all of that? Why they ever wanted to make a new version, much less more than one new version, is completely beyond me. You should just always watch the real thing. This is one I thought of including on the original list, but I already had a lot of TV specials on there, and I didn't think I needed it. When I rewatched it though, it's still surprisingly good. I am aware that most of the movies on this list came out when I was a little kid, so nostalgia is probably a big part of why I like these. We had this one on VHS when I was little, and every Christmas I'd watch it over and over and over. But if you compare this to the Muppet stuff that comes out now, I don't think it's just nostalgia that makes me like it a lot more. Some things really were better back then. As a kid, I loved this because I think it's the only time that they had one movie with all of the Muppets and all of the Sesame Street characters and even all of the Fraggles all together in one movie. So if you were into Jim Henson stuff, this was kind of the ultimate. Actually, Jim Henson himself even makes an appearance at the end of the movie. They get a lot of mileage out of having all these different characters under one roof and interacting when they haven't very much before.
Oh, hi there. Hey, we're Ernie and Bert.
Yeah. Well, hi there yourself. I'm Doc.
Oh, did you know that Doc starts with the letter D?
Why, yes.
Yes starts with the letter Y.
Yeah.
True.
And true starts with the letter D.
Hey, what is this?
Where we come from, this is small talk.
The Muppets used to be really good at having this slight edge to their humor that made them entertaining for all ages, but not inappropriate for kids. They've completely lost the ability to do that now. This special had this whole little subplot where the Swedish chef was trying to cook Big Bird for Christmas dinner, and of course I don't think Disney would ever let them do that now.
There is one thing I think you should see. If you think I'm a nice fat bird, look at this!
Oh, York! News The gobbler gobbler humongo.
Ain't it the truth?
But as a kid, obviously, I thought that this was hilarious. In the show, Big Bird is never in real danger and everything resolves in a sweet way. But having that kind of, slightly dark humor in there makes kids feel like they're not being pandered to and they love it.
Telephone! Telephone!
That's just animal.
Hello! Give me presents!
welcome me.
Oh, pig.
I've been a huge fan of stop-motion animation since I was a little kid, and I loved all the Rankin Bass stuff like Mad Monster Party and all the rest. So Rudolph was one I always looked forward to every year, back before you could watch everything anytime you wanted and when you had to wait until December for them to show it on TV again. It still holds up. It has entertaining songs and characters and a lot of fairly clever dialogue. There are a lot of people now who spend too much time trying to look for things that are supposedly problematic in its portrayals of gender and other issues. It was meant to be for children, and it has an intentionally silly tone throughout. But it does also have a lot of intentional messages about fitting in and what society does and doesn't consider acceptable and normal, and it can have entertaining layers as an adult.
Well, for the first year, the Donners did a pretty fair job of hiding Rudolph's nonconformity.
What puts it over the top for me, though, are all the other holiday specials that Rankin Bass did. Back in those days that I was talking about, where you had to wait for the special that you wanted to come on TV again, I would get even more excited for one of the more rare stop-motion holiday specials to surface. Everybody knows Rudolph, but I don't think that most people know that Rankin Bass actually did about 20 specials like this. And over time, they constituted what was actually some kind of elaborate, interconnected cinematic universe. They did specials for Easter and New Year's and other things too, but they did a bunch that were centered around Christmas and Santa Claus specifically. The people who want to dig into the messages and subtext in Rudolph might be interested to look through all of these as they get increasingly bizarre and start going into things like the origin story of Santa and tapping into pagan, pre-Christian myths about similar figures. Going into the history of Santa, the character that we know now, and how most of it's a fairly recent invention and put together over the last century, that might be like a whole other interesting video. But for now, I'm just going to list Rudolph on here, but also include it with the whole other Rankin Bass stop-motion world, which I think is actually kind of fascinating. A Charlie Brown Christmas, first off, is one of the funniest and most sharply written Peanuts TV specials, and the music and animation are always great, so it has an entertainment factor right off the bat that most of the saccharine holiday specials don't. But it also happens to be a lot deeper than that in its way. I think this might be the only overtly religious Christmas movie on this list, but that's not because I object to religious content. I guess I'm an atheist, or at least an agnostic, but I like a lot of work by Christian artists. It's just that when lecturing and evangelizing become the point for the piece, it usually ruins any subtlety or artistry. Great art is usually better off asking questions rather than trying to provide answers. A lot of good art has Christian themes or Christian messages or a Christian point of view, but when it's specifically marketed as a Christian movie or Christian rock or whatever, that's usually when you can tell that you're going to be in for a piece of crap. They're using that part as a selling point because you wouldn't have any other reason to watch it, and there's a difference between art and propaganda. Because I'm not religious and because I don't like most Christmas movies, that also doesn't mean I have a problem with Christmas. I actually like Christmas itself a lot. In our culture, Christmas is mostly a secular holiday anyway, and as a day for family and friends to get together and exchange gifts, I think it's actually a nice idea. A Charlie Brown Christmas, though, isn't secular at all. In fact, the main point of it is to remind you of what Schulz considers to be the real meaning of Christmas from a Christian point of view, but it's the exact opposite of a pious, sanctimonious, or condescending lecture on the subject. Schulz was a Christian, of course, and it was important to him throughout his whole life, but I still love Peanuts because it's never a simple-minded grift like the things I was talking about where they're marketed specifically for a Christian audience. His values and his worldview are in everything he ever wrote, but he respects his audience enough to let them have their own view and come to their own conclusions. If you learn about Schulz and Peanuts, you'll know how important this special was to him and how closely involved he was in it, and because of that, it comes across as something that's 100% sincere and genuine. I might be an angry old heretic with a dead heart, and also a skeptic as to there being any literal truth in any organized religion, but in A Charlie Brown Christmas, it's done with such earnestness and such love that when the lights dim for Linus's little speech about the true meaning of Christmas, honestly, it can still give me a little chill.
Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
I'm ranking these based on how good they are as Christmas movies, by the way, not necessarily the quality of the filmmaking. Otherwise, I'd probably rank Edward Scissorhands higher, because I really love this movie. I never really thought of it as a Christmas movie though, because it doesn't have the winter wonderland vibe that most Christmas movies aspire to. But I realized it's probably closest of any of these movies to what Christmas actually was for me growing up. Tim Burton grew up in Burbank, and his visions of suburban tract home living are all based very closely on what that was actually like for him. I know because I grew up in Orange County, which is right near Burbank and practically the same. In Southern California, we don't have seasons. Our lawns stay green and most of the trees keep their leaves all through the winter. We'd mark seasons with decorations, and my memories of Christmas are full of fake snow painted on windows and cotton snow stapled on the roofs. This movie, lovingly, if a bit sarcastically, captures that fake polystyrene Christmas that we had in detail. The story of the movie, of course, is more of a retelling of Frankenstein, but Burton always tells Frankenstein from the point of view of the monster, and his desire for love and family and closeness actually make this a very thematically appropriate Christmas movie in that way as well. There are also lots of movies that try very hard to do a sort of naughty or raunchy take on Christmas, and they're straining desperately to be more transgressive than they actually are, or movies that try to act as though they're for a cynic like me who doesn't like Christmas movies. They usually come off as forced and fake and terrible, and they're not any better than straight-faced Christmas movies. Bad Santa's the only one of these that I could think of that actually does it right, probably because Terry Zwigoff is a great director. I can recommend almost any of his other movies, but especially Crumb, which is a masterpiece. None of them will exactly fill you with holiday cheer, though. Bad Santa works because it doesn't pull any punches with the main character, who's a genuinely terrible person, but it's also funny enough and surprising enough that you don't want to stop watching. In the end, he doesn't pull a full Ebenezer Scrooge and become a wonderful person, but he does just enough that you can recognize that for a person as broken as he is, this is probably what it looks like when he's really trying. For an example of why this movie is so much better than other movies trying to be transgressive like it, you could just watch the awful sequel for an example of what not to do, but that movie really isn't worth wasting your time on. A lot of people couldn't quite make head or tails of it when Bob Dylan released a Christmas album, and I'll admit his voice, as it was at the time on the songs he chose, can kind of jump out at you. When the album came out, I worked at a bookstore and I would play it all the time on the store speaker system, to many complaints from customers. I would ignore them and keep playing it because it's Bob Dylan, and even his stuff that you might not like is interesting. I did like it though, even though I also wondered if it was meant to be some kind of joke. But in the end though, I don't think it was meant as a joke at all. It's a completely sincere take on classic standards and entries in the Great American Songbook, for which Dylan has a genuine love. He has such a knowledge of music history that he frequently pulls up details of obscure versions of the songs with different lyrics and orchestration than you might be used to in lesser versions. With Must Be Santa though, he's definitely having a bit of fun, and the video is this bizarre romp with Dylan in a Santa hat and a wig for some reason at a Christmas party that turns into a bit of a drunken riot as his manic barroom polka version of the song plays. I'm allowing short films like the TV specials on this list, by the way, so I'm also going to allow music videos, and this music video, improbably, might just be one of Bob Dylan's best ever. If you're the kind of person who reacts to Christmas cheer with maybe wanting to see a movie with people getting stabbed up a little bit, I thought I'd add some slasher movies to this list. Christmas slasher movies are a surprisingly robust subgenre, so I know it can't be an unusual sentiment. Silent Night, Deadly Night is a bizarre movie, which is what makes it entertaining. It's the story of a little kid who witnesses his parents being killed by a guy in a Santa suit, and then later, as an adult, he goes on to have a mental breakdown and kill people while wearing a Santa suit himself. A killer Santa Claus kind of sounds like a comedy premise, but the movie then it spends all this time trying to add psychological complexity to Billy and explain why he does it all. They spend all this time showing him abused by nuns in an orphanage after his parents were killed, and on and all this other stuff. And it's the way that the movie takes itself so seriously that makes it so weird that it's actually what makes it entertaining to watch. Black Christmas is kind of an early proto-slasher movie that introduced a lot of things that would later become mainstays of the genre in the later 70s and the 80s.
Yes, the caller is in the house. The calls are coming from the house.
There's a killer stalking a sorority house full of buxom victims and so on. The movie's story wanders a little bit too much, and it doesn't focus enough on the sorority house for tension to build, and Halloween and other movies later on would refine this formula a lot. But this is the Christmas version, and it has enough creative murder and weird humor to make it worth watching on its own.
Isn't Santa naughty?
Oh, ho, ho, fuck.
There are a lot of movies that take place at Christmas that aren't necessarily about Christmas, so people might argue about their inclusion on a list like this. And a few of the next entries will fall into that category, but I'll defend the choices when I get there. Gremlins, though, I really think is a full-on Christmas movie. Part of the appeal of this movie when you're a kid is that it's goofy enough to be entertaining, but it's also just dark and violent enough that it can actually be scary and you don't feel like you're being pandered to. I remember that my mom was absolutely horrified by the speech that Kate gives about her dad dressing up as Santa Claus and dying coming down the chimney, which my mom thought almost ruined a movie that she felt was otherwise cute and entertaining.
And that's when I noticed the smell.
It is an absolute what the fuck kind of moment, which is why I love it. For one thing, there's no reason at all for the speech to be in the movie. The fact that Kate doesn't like Christmas isn't something that's really necessary or made use of outside of that one scene, but if they did want to establish that she didn't like Christmas, there are obviously ways they could have done that besides a graphic, lengthy description of a little girl smelling something bad in her chimney, which they then find out is her father in a Santa suit with a broken neck. But although I don't think that particular scene was meant to be funny, it's that kind of what the fuck energy that goes throughout the entire film and makes the pairing of violent puppet hijinks with some genuine Christmas emotion actually work really well. As a kid, I didn't quite get Batman Returns, but as I got older and as superhero movies got more mass-produced and more corporatized, the more I like it. As a kid, I had problems with things like the penguins wearing rocket launchers because I couldn't really wrap my head around how that could be realistically possible. As I grew up, I realized how misguided it is to take a character like Batman and try to make him realistic, and I came to love this film for its surrealism and its sense of humor. Unfortunately, many of the fans today and the corporate filmmaking entities catering to them never got past the place I was at as a little kid where I thought Batman was very serious and I wanted it to all be believable. This isn't a realistic Batman movie, and in a lot of ways it's hardly even a Batman movie at all. You can feel that Tim Burton was much more interested in Penguin and Catwoman, and he focuses the movie on them. I think he likes them better than Batman. Batman is reduced to sort of a bit player in his own movie, which again bothered me as a kid, but now that I'm kind of sick of Batman movies, it's another thing that's gone from being a flaw to an asset. And as much as this is a Penguin and Catwoman movie more than it's a Batman movie, it's also kind of a holiday movie more than it's a superhero movie. The same way that Burton always likes to take kitschy things that he might know from his suburban upbringing and combine them with gothic things from the monster movies he loves. Here you can see that he had a spark of inspiration at the idea of taking traditional American types of Christmas decorations and draping them over these brutalist cityscapes. The idea of Gotham at Christmas became so central to the movie that it's used in several plot points, like the Christmas tree lighting and the mistletoe scene where Batman and Catwoman start out exchanging a kiss and end up exchanging secret identities. Like how in Edward Scissorhands, Burton was telling Frankenstein from the monster's point of view, and his sympathies clearly lied with the monster. Here again, he's telling a story of freaks and monsters that want love and family, and again it ties in perfectly to the Christmas movie aesthetic. From the way Kubrick lights many of the scenes with diffused light from Christmas lights, like how he lit Barry Lyndon with candles, to the film's final scene in a toy store, Eyes Wide Shut is a Christmas movie through and through. It has all the Christmas movie themes of a character going through a life crisis, then going on an episodic adventure that makes him reevaluate his life, and ultimately coming home and realizing that love and his family are the most important things. It would almost be a Hallmark kind of Christmas movie if not for the fact that the episodic adventures he embarks on involve some sort of weird sex cult orgy and a murder mystery. The entire movie, though, is obviously told with a dream logic and not meant to be taken literally, and his inner journey warring between sexual jealousy and fidelity to his wife is of course another version of all those Christmas movies about a character trying to decide what he wants out of life and learning to appreciate what he already has. That the movie deals frankly with the sexual elements and the tug and pull of his relationship with his wife and the fact that it gets so bizarre are exactly what keeps it from getting too on the nose and makes the familiar arc interesting. Plus, of course, it's Kubrick, so I shouldn't even have to mention how impeccably shot it is and how much subtext is going on in every shot. I guess people still debate whether this is a Christmas movie or a Halloween movie, but it's a Christmas movie, so there, I solved it for you. For one thing, the story takes place starting at the end of Halloween and goes through the preparations for Christmas, but also thematically it's exactly the same archetypal Christmas story that I've been talking about. It's a man having a life crisis, wondering what else in the world is out there, and Christmas makes him realize that he always had what he wanted right there at home. It's also Tim Burton's riff on all those Rankin Bass holiday specials that I talked about before, down to using stop motion, and even doing his version of the Rudolph poem with Zero. Like I was saying before, I loved those specials and was fascinated by stop motion animation as a kid, and then when this movie came out, it took the whole thing to another level. This movie blew my mind. I still remember vividly the first night that I saw it. I built a whole little Halloween land in my bedroom out of cardboard and styrofoam, and I built plasticine puppets of the characters that I liked, which they didn't make action figures of. And I had to build a lot of them myself, because the thing that most people might not realize now is that at the time there really weren't many toys or action figures for this movie. When the movie came out, Disney had no idea what to do with it. They were afraid of it. They thought it was much too dark and too weird for their brand. Originally, it didn't even have the Disney logo at the start of the movie. It said Touchstone instead, because Touchstone was another imprint that they used for off-brand things that they were afraid might damage their family-friendly image. I remember at the time hunting around for the action figures, and the Disney store in my mall only had two. It had 2 figures. The clerk that worked there told me that they were only sent a single box of toys for the movie. Most of those original figures, which are now very valuable, I got in January after Christmas when Disney dumped unsold toys into outlet stores. The KB toy store at my local mall had clearance Nightmare Before Christmas toys piled practically to the ceiling for $2 a piece, and that's how I bought a lot of them. Now, of course, Nightmare Before Christmas merchandise practically keeps Hot Topic in business, and they sell it by the truckload at Disneyland. Disney might have thought the movie was dark and scary and morally questionable, but of course, as soon as they see that they can make a nickel from it, they're immediately on board and try to whore it out as hard as they can. So now, if I say that this is one of my favorite movies, people probably roll their eyes at me for being so into something that they think of as mostly being an apparel logo to peddle shit to your basic middle school goth girl. But in this case, I'm going to be annoying and pull the I liked this band before it was popular card, because in this case, it's absolutely true. I didn't like Nightmare Before Christmas as a fashion accessory because at the time you couldn't even find it on clothes. I liked it because I thought it was an incredible movie, and the craftsmanship of the animation is amazing. The visual style was new and electrifying at the time. It took Disney and the rest of the world a little while to catch up to me, but I'm used to that now. Fanny and Alexander is another movie that really should have been on the earlier versions of this list. It's maybe my favorite Bergman movie, but for whatever reason I just didn't think of it when I was originally listing Christmas movies. The long version, which is the better version, is almost 6 hours, but it's divided into 4 parts, and the entire first part takes place during a Christmas play and then at a family Christmas party, so that whole entire section is almost exclusively a Christmas movie. The Christmas party is how we're introduced to the different characters and their complicated relationships with one another. So that's actually the device that Bergman uses to lay out everything so that you can understand the rest of the story that follows in the other parts. This maybe isn't as revered as other Bergman movies like The Seventh Seal or Wild Strawberries, which I guess more people would choose as their favorite Bergman films. But a big part of why I like this is the length, which allows you to spend time with his family and observe their lives. It's also a very beautiful film to look at, with all of the scenes with snow and candles and Christmas decorations and so on. And I think that this has some of the best Christmas imagery in movies. It's got an almost painterly Barry Lyndon kind of look to it that's perfect for evoking the feeling of being inside by a warm fire on a snowy Christmas day, even if, like me, you've never actually had a Christmas someplace where it was snowing.
I got lots of problems. Female trouble.
This is the movie that I have no idea how I forgot to include it in the original version of this video. This is John Waters' best movie and one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's also undeniably a huge Christmas movie.
I'd better get them cha-cha heels.
How very sweet of you, dear.
Merry Christmas, honey bunch.
What are these?
Those are your new shoes, Dawn.
Those aren't the right kind. I told you cha-cha heel black ones.
Nice girls don't wear cha-cha heels.
Dawn Davenport not getting the cha-cha heels that she demands on Christmas is the final straw that leads to her running away from home and spiraling into a life of crime and depravity. I've probably seen this movie 20 times and there are still parts of it that are hard to sit through, but John Waters movies are never only about being disgusting as they can sometimes be. This is a really smart movie with a lot to say about our culture, and at the same time it manages to be endlessly funny and quotable, and it doesn't lose any of its shock value even 45 years later.
Leave me alone! Don't touch me! Lay off me!
I hate you! Fuck you! Fuck you both, you awful people! You're not my parents! I hate you! I hate this house! I hate Christmas!
Not on Christmas.
And finally, Muppet Christmas Carol. What can I say about this movie except that it's basically perfect? If you just heard that they were going to do a Muppet version of Charles Dickens' most overtold story, you probably wouldn't think that the result would be Citizen Kane. But something about this just works so incredibly well. The Muppets' brand of humor back then and before they were bought out by Disney and people forgot how to write for them was kid-friendly, but also just sassy and hip and subversive enough that it allows them to also genuinely do the themes of the story, which might seem saccharine or overly sentimental on their own. Tiny Tim's a little crippled boy with a heart of gold and a mouthful of pithy observations about Jesus, and he can become almost a cartoon if you don't play him just right. But if he also happens to be a frog puppet, and this is just presented without an apology, it's an acknowledgement of the heightened nature of the story, and it allows Tiny Tim to be an exaggeration and still feel right. It might seem blasphemous, and I'm not saying this to try to be superior or try to criticize Charles Dickens, because I like Dickens, but this might just be one of the few adaptations that improves on his material. I mean, maybe you think I'm an idiot for singing such high praises of a Muppet movie, but if you haven't seen it for a while, go watch it again. The amazing thing that they do here is that simultaneous to adding jokes about rats and hula skirts, they also manage to be totally true to the spirit and even the storytelling of the book. By having Gonzo as the narrator using a lot of lines directly from the book, they even managed to keep more of Dickens' language and his wit than most adaptations are ever able to. And then Michael Caine gives a genius performance as Scrooge, playing the role absolutely straight. He makes you believe in the reality of the character and gives him emotional complexity, whether he's expressing a genuine terror at his own death or possibly about to get into a fist fight with an angry pig puppet. He also plays a perfect horrible Scrooge in the beginning scenes, and then he guides you along Scrooge's inner journey and painful memories in the middle so that you come to understand him, and in the end he's wonderful as the happy, reformed Scrooge, and it makes it a joy to watch him happy without the transformation ever feeling cheap or unearned. The songs are all great, the jokes are all funny. Moments like Scrooge left alone at school as a child are done sincerely enough that they're genuinely affecting. It's also a beautiful movie to look at, with sets and costumes that are straight out of everybody's imagination of what a Dickensian London at Christmas should look like. And all the geniuses that built the Muppets extend their puppetry craft here beyond the Muppets to make other remarkable things like the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. I could go on, but the point is that I just think everything in this movie is great. If you haven't seen it before and you want to, I should also mention that there are at least 3 different versions of the movie in circulation. Originally, Jeffrey Katzenberg forced Brian Henson to cut out the song The Love Is Gone because he felt it was too slow and children for some reason couldn't handle 2 serious minutes in a movie that's full of joking puppets. This is from the same brain trust at Disney around the same time that they wanted to cut the song A Part of Your World from The Little Mermaid. Fortunately, they gave in that case. The Love Is Gone isn't as classic of a song as A Part of Your World, but it's a particularly stupid cut because not only does it explain a key part of Scrooge's backstory, the movie happens to end with a reprise of the song with the lyric changed to The Love We Found, only without the version of the song that they cut, the reprise is unmotivated and it doesn't mean as much. Sometimes without explanation in foreign markets or on TV, a version of the movie with the song reinstated will reappear, but other times, as on the film's Blu-ray release, the song is still missing. To further complicate matters, recently in some TV showings there's been another version that has an extra verse added to the Marley's song, and several other bits of footage put back in different places. As far as I know, there hasn't been an explanation for this version either. Disney seems to use the 3 versions just interchangeably, and even though we know which is the director's preferred version, they never really specify which one you're going to get. This is because Disney is a company that exploits and despoils art, and not a creative entity. I just mentioned all that so that you know to check which version of the movie you're going to get if you buy it. But all of that aside, Muppet Christmas Carol is a small miracle of a movie. It takes what's probably the most overtold, archetypal Christmas story there is, which could otherwise be everything that's obnoxious in a Christmas movie, and it just does it so well that it's enough to make even my cold, dead heart feel something sort of like the Christmas spirit.
Have a merry, 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 merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Have a happy holiday. Merry Christmas. Get yourself into a glow underneath the mistletoe. Have a Christmas in a good old-fashioned way. Merry Christmas.
Hang a holly wreath and candle in each window. Hang your heart upon a shining...